They say you'll never see the end coming when you're standing in paradise. My paradise was a penthouse on Park Avenue with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Central Park like a living masterpiece. I had a Wharton degree, a name that opened any door in Manhattan, and a love story that felt scripted by a kinder God. My husband's Ethan was my world. I saw his ambition not as a threat, but as a fire I was privileged to nurture. I believed his admiration for my family's legacy was genuine, that he loved me for the woman I was, not the heiress I happened to be. I willingly traded the corner office at Sterling Enterprises for the role of philanthropist and devoted wife, convinced that building a home with him was a greater achievement than any corporate merger. Looking back, I see the truth. My home wasn't a sanctuary. It was the meticulously designed stage for my own destruction, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. My sister, Chloe, was a frequent guest in our perfect world. I mistook her lingering glances and quiet envy for simple sibling rivalry, a shadow I tried to erase with extravagant gifts and endless affection. I wanted her to share in my happiness, to feel the warmth of the life I was building. I remember one evening at a charity gala I had organized, seeing her and Ethan laughing together in a quiet corner. A wave of warmth washed over me. I saw it as the final piece of my perfect family puzzle falling into place. He was bonding with the person who mattered most to me. I now know that what I witnessed wasn't the blossoming of a friendship, but the celebration of a conspiracy. They weren't just sharing a joke, they were laughing at me. The Millers, my doting in-laws, watched from their sponsored table, their smiles as false as the pearls around my mother-in-law's neck. They were all actors in this grand play, and I was their generous, blind benefactor. The doctors called my recovery miraculous. A week ahead of schedule, I was discharged from the pristine, white walls of the private hospital suite that had been my prison. The car crash was a blur of screeching tires and shattering glass, but I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for a second chance. I decided to go straight home, picturing the look of stunned joy on Ethan's face when I walked through the door. I told my driver to drop me at the corner, wanting the moment to be ours alone. As I stepped into the silent marble foyer of our penthouse, the air was still and heavy. I smiled, imagining him working in his study, completely unaware. I was a ghost returning to her life, ready to embrace the man I loved. That silence, I now realized, wasn't peace. It was the calm of a predator's den when the master is otherwise occupied. I walked down the long gallery hallway, my footsteps muffled by the expensive silk runners. My portraits, painted by celebrated artists, watched me pass, their smiles suddenly feeling like a mockery. Something was wrong. The air was thick with a cloying perfume, not my signature scent, but Chloe's. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, a lingering effect of the trauma. He'd probably invited her over to keep him company while I was away. That was it. He was a good husband, a good brother-in-law. But as I drew closer to our bedroom, a sound reached me, a soft, rhythmic sound that my mind refused to process. It was a sound of intimacy, a sound of pleasure, a sound that had no place in my home without me. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread against my ribs. My hand trembled as I reached for the polished brass doorknob. I didn't throw it open. I pushed it, slowly, silently, as if not wanting to startle the vipers in my nest. And there they were. The scene that would forever be seared into my memory. A perfect tableau of my ruin. It wasn't just the betrayal of my husband in our bed that broke me. It was the sight of my own sister, her head thrown back in ecstasy, her body entwined with his, the world tilted on its axis. Time seemed to stop, the sounds from the bed fading into a dull roar in my ears. I saw the wedding photo on the nightstand, my smiling face looking out over the scene of my own desecration. I was a spectator to the demolition of my life, paralyzed by a shock so profound it felt like a physical blow, stealing the very air from my lungs. They didn't see me at first. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, a ghost in my own doorway. Then, Chloe's eyes fluttered open and met mine. There was no flicker of panic, no shame, no remorse. Her expression hardened instantly into a mask of pure venomous hatred. A sneer twisted her lips. Ethan, following her gaze, froze, his face a pathetic canvas of shock and fear. But it was Chloe's voice that shattered the last vestiges of the woman I used to be. She didn't whisper. She spat the words at me, each one a poisoned dart. "You should be dead." In that single, horrifying moment, everything clicked into place. The faulty brakes, the convenient business trip Ethan was on, the accident that was no accident at all. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had tried to eliminate me. A strange and terrifying calm washed over me. The searing pain in my chest didn't vanish. It crystallized into something cold, hard, and unbreakable. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of my despair. I simply took a step back, my eyes locked on theirs, letting them see the depth of my love for them. With deliberate, measured slowness, I pulled the bedroom door closed, the soft click of the latch sounding like a death sentence, their death sentence. I turned my back on the ruins of my marriage and walked away, not in defeat, but in declaration of war. The naive, trusting Arya Sterling died in that hallway. In her place, a strategist was born, fueled by a single, chilling purpose. They wanted me dead. I would grant their wish, but not before I made them wish they had never been born at all. I didn't run. I didn't seek refuge in a friend's arms, or shatter priceless art in a fit of rage. Instead, I walked with a preternatural calm to the home office, the one my father built, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather that smelled of power and old money. I sat in his chair, the cool leather, a stark contrast to the fire raging inside me. The pain was an ocean, vast and deep, but I refused to drown. My mind, the one I'd honed at Wharton, began to compartmentalize. The heartbroken wife was locked in a steel vault. The strategist, the heiress, the CEO in waiting, took control. I saw the situation for what it was, a hostile takeover of my life, executed by insurgents I had welcomed into my home. A direct confrontation would be emotional, messy, and weak. It would be what they expected. My victory would not be found in screams and tears, but in the cold, silent precision of a perfectly executed plan. They had underestimated me. That would be their ruin. My fingers glided over the smooth, cool surface of the desk. My enemies were no longer my husband and sister. They were assets to be liquidated, threats to be neutralized. I created a mental dossier for each of them. Ethan Miller, driven by a crippling inferiority complex and insatiable greed. His weakness was his ego. Chloe Sterling, consumed by a lifetime of jealousy, believing she was owed my life. Her weakness was her emotional, reckless nature. The Millers, parasites clinging to our wealth, desperate for a status they could never earn. Their weakness was their dependence. My objective crystallized with chilling clarity. Divorce was insufficient. Public shame was a temporary sting. No, this required something more profound. I would orchestrate their complete and total annihilation. I would strip them of their money, their reputations, their freedom, and their futures. I would leave them with nothing but the bitter taste of their own treachery, forced to watch as I ascended to heights they could only dream of. The foundation of my strategy would be deception. My greatest weapon was their perception of me as a fragile, broken doll. The car crash provided the perfect cover. I would return to them not as a woman scorned, but as a victim suffering from partial amnesia, confused and vulnerable. I would play the part of the loving wife, struggling to piece her memory back together, leaning on her devoted husband for support. Their arrogance would make them believe it without question. This mask of fragility would be my shield and my listening device, allowing me to move among them, gathering evidence while they lowered their guard. And while they pitied me, my first move would be silent and devastating. As the sole signatory on the Sterling family trust, I held the key to the kingdom. I would turn off the spigot. Their world, built on my money, would begin to crumble, not with a bang, but with the humiliating silence of a declined credit card. I looked out the panoramic window at the city lights, a glittering empire that was my birthright. They had tried to steal it. They had tried to murder me for it. A vow settled deep in my soul, cold and heavy as a block of marble. The Arya they knew, the one who loved unconditionally and forgave easily, was as dead as their chances of survival. I would not mourn her. I would honor her memory by becoming the queen they never saw coming. They had started a war, believing they were fighting a lamb. They were about to discover they had awakened a dragon. Every tear I didn't shed would forge my resolve. Every sleepless night would be spent planning their demise. They wanted me dead. I would do worse. I would make them live long enough to witness every last detail of their own destruction, orchestrated by the woman they had so foolishly written off. The game was on, and I was no longer a player. I was the board, the pieces, and the hand that would sweep them all away. The first morning was a masterclass in deception. I awoke not to the familiar agony of betrayal, but to the cold, clear focus of a general on the dawn of battle. When Ethan entered the room, carrying a breakfast tray with a look of feigned concern, the performance began. I allowed a flicker of confusion to cross my face, my eyes wide and unfocused. Ethan, what happened? My head hurt so much. I let my voice tremble, playing the part of the fragile survivor, the amnesiac wife. He rushed to my side, his relief palpable. It wasn't relief that I was alive. It was relief that I was broken. He saw a victim, a liability he could manage. He had no idea he was looking at his executioner, and I was studying his every reaction, logging every lie for future use. My grief was a weapon now, and I would wield it with surgical precision. My first move was silent, executed from the comfort of my father's leather chair, before Ethan had even finished his coffee. I placed a call to Mr. Harrison, our family's private banker for over 40 years, and a man whose loyalty was to the sterling name, not to the man who had married into it. I explained, in a voice laced with carefully crafted vulnerability, that the accident had left my memory in tatters. As a precaution, Harrison, I whispered, I need you to initiate a full security review of all sterling accounts. Freeze everything. All secondary cards, all joint access, ... until my doctors say I'm clear. He agreed without hesitation, his tone dripping with sympathy for the poor, confused heiress. The first artery of their lavish lifestyle was severed with a single polite phone call. They wouldn't even feel the blood loss until it was too late. The initial tremor of their world collapsing reached me that afternoon. I received a text from a contact at Bergdorf's, a little favor I'd called in. Chloe, it seemed, had attempted to purchase a 5-figure crocodile skin handbag, a gaudy trophy, to celebrate her supposed victory. The image my contact painted was exquisite, the triumphant sneer on my sister's face turning to slack-jawed disbelief, then to furious, crimson-faced humiliation as the sales associate whispered those beautiful words, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card has been declined." She tried another, declined, and another, declined. The public shaming, the whispers from other shoppers, was a small, sweet appetizer for the main course of her ruin. She had tried to take my life. I began by taking her credit. It was a perfectly balanced transaction. Ethan confronted me that evening, his charm curdling into irritation. "Arya, darling, there seems to be some issue with our accounts. All my cards were rejected today." He tried to keep his voice gentle, but I could hear the panicked edge. I looked up at him from the chaise lounge where I was resting, my expression a perfect mask of innocence and distress. "Oh no, that's terrible. I did speak with Harrison. I was so worried someone might try to take advantage of my ... condition." I let a tear well in my eye. "He must have frozen everything to protect us. Why don't you call him?" I offered, knowing full well Harrison would never take his call on this matter. I watched the frustration war with his desire to maintain the facade of the caring husband. He was trapped, and he didn't even see the bars of the cage I was building around him. The next day, I made my most critical alliance. I met Julian Vance, a man whose reputation was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in the circles that mattered. A former FBI counterintelligence agent, he now ran the most discreet and effective private security firm in the city. We met not in some shadowy alley, but in a private room at the Met, surrounded by priceless artifacts of fallen empires. I didn't cry or plead. I laid out the facts with the cold dispassion of a CAO outlining a hostile takeover. I need irrefutable proof of adultery, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder, I stated, sliding a file across the table. My husband, my sister, I want their every move documented. I want their secrets unearthed. Your budget is unlimited. Your only director is absolute discretion. He simply nodded, his eyes showing not pity, but professional respect. The hunt had officially begun. Julian's team was ruthlessly efficient. While I lured Ethan and Chloe out for a recovery lunch at a restaurant I knew they despised, his operatives swept the penthouse. As I had suspected, they found a listening device clumsily hidden behind a bookshelf in my study, a pathetic attempt to monitor my calls. Julian's man removed it, but that was just the appetizer. They then installed their own state-of-the-art surveillance network. Microscopic cameras in every common area, and audio recorders so sensitive they could pick up a whisper from across the room. My home, the stage for my betrayal, was now my primary intelligence-gathering asset. I was no longer a blind victim in my own house. I was the unseen, all-hearing warden of a prison they didn't know they were in. The first recording was a symphony to my ears. I sat in my secure temporary office, headphones on, listening as my husband and sister argued in my kitchen. The financial freeze was working faster than I'd imagined. "What do you mean you can't cover the payment on the condo?" Chloe's voice was shrill, laced with panic. "I told you to be patient." Ethan slapped back, his arrogance fraying. "This is a temporary hiccup. Once I get the board to declare her incompetent, we'll have everything." They were already turning on each other, their greed a corrosive acid eating away at their pathetic alliance. They spoke of my life's work, my inheritance, as if it were a prize they had already won. I saved the file, labeling it Exhibit A, The Arrogance of Fools. My return to Sterling Enterprises was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. I walked into the lobby, leaning heavily on Ethan's arm, my movements slow, my gaze distant. I was the very picture of a tragic heroine. The board members, many of whom had known me since I was a child, rushed forward with expressions of deep concern. I allowed Ethan to speak for me, to assure them that he would be handling my responsibilities while I recovered. He swelled with pride, preening under their sympathetic gazes. He believed this was his coronation, the moment he finally stepped out of my shadow. I let him believe it. I needed his ego inflated to its maximum capacity because the higher he climbed in his own mind, the more devastating his fall would be. The moment the office door closed behind me, the fragile heiress vanished. I used a secure, encrypted line to call Marcus Thorne, the head of our internal audit division, and a man whose loyalty to my father was legendary. "Marcus," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, "I'm initiating a Level 1 priority audit of the entire acquisitions division, effective immediately. Focus on all projects managed by Ethan Miller for the last 18 months. I want every expense report, every contract, every wire transfer scrutinized. The official reason is a standard quarterly review. The real reason is that I suspect our company is being robbed blind, and I want you to find me the proof." He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Consider it done, Miss Sterling." The corporate guillotine was now in position. Tighten the psychological screws. I began to weaponize my supposed memory loss. One evening, as Chloe sat with us in the living room, I turned to her with a look of childlike confusion. "Chloe, it's the strangest thing," I began, my voice soft. "Ever since the accident, I keep smelling your perfume in the oddest places. On Ethan's jackets, even on the pillows in our bedroom." I watched her face. The blood drained from it instantly, leaving behind a pallid mask of terror. Ethan shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. I had just demonstrated that my broken mind was still making connections, planting a seed of pure paranoia in their minds. They couldn't know what I remembered and what I didn't. From that moment on, every innocent question I asked would feel like an accusation. Their paranoia became my favorite spectator sport. Through the hidden cameras, I watched them devolve into a state of constant suspicion. They started having their most sensitive conversations in hushed tones inside the walk-in closet, unaware that a microphone was nestled in a box of my old riding hats. They began to suspect everyone but me. Was it a rival on the board? A disgruntled former employee? Ethan became convinced a corporate spy was trying to sabotage his ascent. They were rats in a maze of my design, frantically searching for an enemy, never once thinking to look at the seemingly helpless woman sitting quietly in the next room, orchestrating their every panicked move. Their arrogance was the one variable I could always count on. The next blow was aimed directly at Ethan's fragile ego. He had ordered a custom Aston Martin, a vulgar symbol of his anticipated triumph. The final payment was due, and naturally, the wire transfer from his personal account failed. I listened with cold satisfaction to the recording of the call from the enraged dealership manager. The public humiliation of having his dream car withheld was more than Ethan could bear. That night, he didn't try to comfort me or play the part of the loving husband. He threw a crystal glass against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces, ranting about incompetent bankers and bureaucratic nonsense. He was losing control, his carefully constructed mask of sophistication cracking under the relentless, invisible pressure I was applying. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the confession that would seal their fates. The combined stress of the financial blockade and their growing paranoia finally pushed them over the edge. I was listening live when their argument in the study escalated. "This is a disaster," Chloe shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. "If you had just made sure the brakes on her car were cut properly, we wouldn't be dealing with any of this. We'd have it all by now." A beat of silence, then Ethan's venomous hiss. "Shut your mouth, you idiot. Do you want someone to hear you?" It was too late. I heard them. My hand was perfectly steady as I clicked save, securing the audio file that would send them both to prison for a very, very long time. Checkmate was now inevitable. I just had to decide when and where to declare it. With the hard evidence secured, I moved to dismantle their support structure. I arranged a quiet lunch with my godmother, Eleanor Vance, the most influential member of the Sterling Enterprises board. Throughout the meal, I played my part to perfection. I spoke of my spotty memory and my deep concern for Ethan. "He seems so stressed, Eleanor," I confided, dabbing a tear from my eye. "He's been making such aggressive financial moves lately. It's not like him. I worry the pressure of running things is getting to him." I wasn't accusing him. I was defending him, framing his criminal activity as a symptom of stress. I was planting a carefully cultivated seed of doubt in the mind of his most powerful potential ally. When the time came, she would remember this conversation and see his downfall not as a coup, but as a tragedy he brought upon himself. As this first phase of my silent war concluded, I took a moment to survey the battlefield from my command center. The foundation of their world was fractured beyond repair. They were financially hemorrhaging, professionally exposed, and psychologically tormented by a threat they couldn't identify. They were turning on each other, their greed and impatience making them sloppy and predictable, and all the while they still looked at me and saw a fragile doll, a broken thing to be pitied and managed. They had no idea that every dollar they lost, every sleepless night they endured, and every argument that drove a wedge between them was a direct result of my will. The satisfaction was not a fiery passion, but a cold, clean energy. The game was proceeding exactly as I had designed. My silent siege was beginning to starve them out. Marcus Thorne's preliminary audit report landed on my secure server, a masterpiece of understated corporate devastation. It detailed a pattern of anomalous, expenditures, and unauthorized fund diversions within Ethan's division, all meticulously traced to shell corporations. The numbers were staggering, enough to trigger an SEC investigation on their own. I watched Ethan on the hidden camera as he read the emails summoning him to a clarification meeting with the audit committee. The color drained from his face. His professional world, the one he had schemed and killed for, was beginning to implode. He was no longer a rising star. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are dangerously unpredictable. I knew their desperation would soon force them to abandon subtlety and embrace a far more brutal strategy. The financial pressure was no longer a mild inconvenience. It had become a constant, humiliating torment for them. I received a frantic, tearful call from my mother-in-law, Carol Miller, wailing that her membership at the Greenwich Country Club had been suspended due to non-payment. She spoke as if it were a humanitarian crisis, a profound injustice inflicted upon her. I feigned a weak, confused voice, promising to look into it, all while savoring the delicious irony. These were people who had applauded my attempted murder, and they were now unraveling because they could no longer order a $30 cocktail on my dime. Their sense of entitlement was so profound that they couldn't conceive of a world where their parasitic lifestyle wasn't a guaranteed right. Their suffering was a petty, satisfying music to my ears, a prelude to the grand symphony of their destruction. Chloe's unraveling was far more volcanic. Julian's team had a tail on her, and the reports were a daily source of grim amusement. She had been publicly ejected from a Soho boutique after a screaming match over another decline card. She'd tried to use my name, my legacy, as a bludgeon to get what she wanted, only to be met with cold, corporate indifference. She was a sterling in name only, and without the power of my fortune behind her, she was just another angry, entitled nobody. I watched the surveillance footage of her returning to the penthouse that night, her face a mask of incandescent rage. She threw a vase, one of my mother's favorite Ming pieces, against the wall, shattering it. She wasn't just angry about the money. She was furious that her performance as the new queen of the castle was being rejected by the world. That night, the hidden microphone in the study captured the conversation that marked the beginning of their final, desperate gambit. The audit is a witch hunt, and the money is gone. We're trapped. Ethan's voice was a low, panicked growl. Chloe's reply was sharp, venomous. No, we're not trapped. We just used the wrong tool. We tried to get rid of her body, but we should have attacked her mind. A chill, colder than any I had felt before, snaked down my spine. I leaned closer to the speaker, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm. She continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's already unstable from the accident. All we have to do is give her a little push. We don't need to kill her. We just need to prove she's crazy. Their new plan was as insidious as it was brilliant, a testament to Chloe's particular brand of serpentine cruelty. They would have me declared mentally incompetent. They would use my feigned amnesia, my fragility, against me, twisting my performance into a weapon to strip me of my rights, my freedom, and my company, a conservatorship. It was the perfect corporate coup disguised as an act of loving concern. Ethan would become my legal guardian, gaining absolute control over the Sterling Empire, while I would be locked away in some gilded cage, a living ghost with no voice and no power. They weren't just trying to rob me anymore. They were trying to erase me, to make me a footnote in my own life story. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless, but my fear was quickly replaced by a cold, exhilarating fury. They had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to justify their complete and utter ruin. The gaslighting began the very next day. It was subtle at first, designed to chip away at my confidence and create a narrative of my mental decline. I would find my car keys in the refrigerator, my favorite earrings missing from their case, appointments inexplicably cancelled from my calendar. Each time, Ethan would approach me with that infuriating look of deep, sorrowful concern. "Arya, darling, Are you feeling all right? You seem so forgetful lately. Chloe would chime in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Maybe you should rest more, sis. You've been through so much. They were building a case, brick by insidious brick, creating a portfolio of my instability to present to the world. I played my part, feigning confusion and distress, while Julian's cameras meticulously documented their every act of psychological warfare. They were writing a script for my downfall, unaware I was producing a documentary of their crimes. Their next move was to bring in a professional. Through Julian's network, I learned they had contacted a doctor, Alistair Finch, a psychiatrist whose license was rumored to have survived multiple malpractice suits thanks to a team of aggressive lawyers. He was a hired gun, a man who would provide any diagnosis for the right price. They met him at a discreet restaurant downtown, a meeting I had recorded in full, both audio and video. I listened as Ethan and Chloe painted a heartbreaking picture of my supposed descent into paranoia and delusion. They fed him lies, twisted events, and fabricated symptoms. Finch listened intently, nodding and taking notes, his expression a perfect blend of professional gravity and avarice. At the end of the meeting, a thick envelope of cash was passed under the table. The price for my sanity had been set. To make their case airtight, they needed to orchestrate a public breakdown. They chose the annual fundraiser for the Children's Literacy Foundation, an event I had chaired for years. It was my territory, my crowd. Minutes before I was scheduled to give my opening speech, Chloe approached me backstage, her face a mask of panic. Aria, I can't find the final donation figures. The ones you were just working on, they're gone. It was a lie, of course. I knew the figures were on a flash drive in my clutch. But I played along, my face crumbling into a picture of distress. I fumbled through my notes, my hands shaking, my breathing growing shallow. Ethan rushed to my side. Darling, it's okay, calm down. They were staging my incompetence in front of our city's most influential people, who were now watching with a mixture of pity and alarm. I allowed the charade to continue for a few moments, letting the whispers ripple through the backstage area. Then, with a deep shuddering breath, I found the flash drive in my purse. Oh, thank goodness, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm just not myself lately. I leaned on Ethan, letting him guide me to the podium. The performance was flawless. I delivered a speech that was heartfelt but slightly disjointed, stumbling over a few words, appearing fragile and overwhelmed. I could feel the pity in the room, a thick, cloying blanket of it. Ethan and Chloe exchanged a triumphant look over my head. They believed they had just won a major victory, successfully painting me as a tragic figure who could no longer handle her responsibilities. They had no idea they were merely actors in my grand finale. The formal psychiatric evaluation was scheduled a week later. It was to take place in my own home, a strategic choice on their part to make me feel cornered in my own territory. Dr. Finch arrived with a leather briefcase and an air of sanctimonious authority. Ethan and Chloe flanked him, their faces etched with solemn concern. I sat opposite them on a silk damask sofa, dressed in a simple cashmere lounge set, projecting an aura of vulnerable fragility. I knew this was a command performance. Julian had fitted me with a recording device disguised as a Cartier brooch, and a micro camera was hidden in a floral arrangement on the coffee table. The stage was set for them to formalize their lies, and I was ready to give them all the material they needed. Dr. Finch began with a series of gentle, patronizing questions about my childhood, my marriage, and the accident. He then moved on to the evidence Ethan and Chloe had provided. Aria, Ethan tells me you've been having moments of severe paranoia, believing the staff is spying on you. Can you tell me about that? I looked down at my hands, my voice a near whisper. Sometimes I just feel like the walls have eyes. I know it sounds crazy. I was feeding him exactly what he wanted to hear, confirming his pre-written diagnosis. I spoke of memory gaps, of misplaced objects, of a pervasive sense of being watched. I was painting a portrait of a woman losing her grip on reality, and he was eagerly sketching every word into his official report, the one that would be used to strip me of my life. The interview was a masterclass in manipulation, a duel of deceptions where only I knew the true stakes. While Finch saw a broken patient, I saw a corrupt charlatan whose medical license I would personally see incinerated. I was cataloging his every leading question, his every unethical prompt for the lawsuit that would inevitably follow. When he finally closed his notebook, his expression was one of grave finality. Based on my preliminary assessment, he announced to Ethan and Chloe, "I believe Arya is suffering from severe post-traumatic stress coupled with Capgras delusion. She requires immediate, intensive inpatient care. I will prepare the necessary paperwork to petition the court for an emergency conservatorship on the grounds of mental incapacitation." The words hung in the air, a death sentence for the woman I was pretending to be. Ethan placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, his touch feeling like a spider's crawl. Their victory seemed absolute. They had medical experts backing, a growing collection of anecdotal evidence, and a victim who appeared too weak to fight back. Their arrogance swelled to a colossal scale. They stopped hiding their discussions, believing my paranoia would discredit anything I might claim to overhear. The hidden microphones became a treasure trove of damning admissions. They openly discussed which private psychiatric facility to send me to, debated how to liquidate certain sterling assets once they had control, and laughed about how easy it had all been. They were so blinded by their impending triumph that they failed to see the web tightening around them with every word they spoke. Their hubris was the greatest ally I could have ever asked for. The shift from psychological warfare to direct threat came on a Tuesday night. It was raining, the city lights blurring behind the water-streaked windows of the penthouse. I was in the library, ostensibly reading, when Ethan walked in. He dismissed the housekeeper, and the air in the room grew heavy. The false concern was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard glint of impatience. "Arya," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "Dr. Finch believes you need help. The board meeting is next week. I'm going to present his findings and ask them to grant me temporary oversight. It's for your own good, for the good of the company." He was no longer asking. He was informing me of my fate. He was laying out the terms of my surrender, expecting me to capitulate without a fight. I looked up from my book, my expression a carefully crafted mask of confusion and fear. "Oversight. Ethan, I don't understand. This is my father's company. I'm fine." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile, all teeth. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was far more terrifying than any shout. "You're not fine, Arya. You're a liability, and liabilities need to be managed." He leaned down, his face just inches from mine, the scent of his expensive cologne suddenly suffocating. "You need to accept the help we're offering. It would be a terrible shame if you were to have another ... unfortunate accident. Sometimes brakes fail twice. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The threat was no longer veiled. It was a raw, naked promise of violence, delivered in the heart of my own home. In that moment, the last vestiges of the game vanished. This was no longer about money or corporate control. It wasn't even about simple revenge for his infidelity. This was about survival. He had just admitted, with chilling clarity, that he was willing to kill me to get what he wanted. My feigned amnesia, my fragile act, had pushed him not to pity, but to the precipice of murder. A wave of ice-cold adrenaline washed through me. My fear was real, of primal instinct screaming at me to run. But something else rose to meet it, a resolve so absolute, so diamond hard, that it burned away the fear entirely. He had just crossed a line from which there was no return. He had just signed not only his own death warrant, but Chloe's as well. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, letting a single tear roll down my cheek, a final piece of performance art for the man who was threatening my life. I understand," I whispered, my voice breaking with manufactured terror. He straightened up, satisfied. He believed he had finally broken me, that his threat had secured my compliance. He turned and walked out of the library, leaving me alone in the silence. The moment the door clicked shut, my expression hardened into stone. The tear on my cheek felt like a drop of acid. He had just made the single greatest mistake of his life. He had confirmed he was a murderer in waiting, and in doing so, he had removed any lingering shred of mercy I might have possessed. Total annihilation was no longer a strategy. It was a moral necessity. I immediately placed a call to Julian Vance on an encrypted line. My voice was steady, devoid of any emotion. He just threatened my life. The protocol is now active. I want a full, armed security detail, visible and overt, assigned to me by morning. I want them in the hallways of this building, outside this apartment. Let him see them. Let him know the game has changed. Julian's response was immediate and professional. Consider it done. Are you safe for the night? I looked round the library, at the priceless books and the portraits of my ancestors. I've never been safer, I replied, because I know exactly what I have to do now. The fear was gone, replaced by a clarity so profound it was almost peaceful. The hunt was over. It was time to prepare for the slaughter. The next morning, Ethan and Chloe awoke to find two impeccably dressed but powerfully built men standing sentinel outside our apartment door. Two more were stationed in the lobby. Their faces, when they saw them, were a perfect picture of confusion and rage. Ethan confronted me in the kitchen, his voice a furious hiss. What is the meaning of this, Arya? Who are these people? I looked up from my tea, my eyes wide with practiced innocence. Oh, them. After what you said last night about my safety, I realized you were right. I am a liability, so I hired a security team to protect me, to protect us. I smiled sweetly at him, a gesture that was now more menacing than any threat. I was using his own words to build my fortress, right in front of his eyes. The presence of the security detail threw their plans into chaos. They could no longer move freely. Their conversations were stifled, and their ability to physically intimidate me was gone. They were prisoners in the gilded cage they had built for me. I watched them on the cameras, pacing like trapped wolves, their frustration mounting with every passing hour. The board meeting was just days away, and they could feel their control slipping through their fingers. Their desperation was palpable, a foul stench of fear and failure that permeated the entire penthouse. They had escalated the conflict to a matter of life and death, assuming I would crumble. Instead, I had built a wall of muscle and steel around myself, turning their threat into my shield. The forged psychiatric report from Dr. Finch arrived via courier. I had Julian's team intercept it, make a perfect copy for our evidence file, and then deliver the original as if nothing had happened. I read the document with a detached, clinical interest. It was a work of fiction, a tapestry of lies woven together to paint me as a paranoid, delusional wreck. It recommended my immediate and involuntary commitment to a private care facility. This piece of paper was their golden ticket, the key, they believed, would unlock the entire sterling fortune. To them, it was the final nail in my coffin. To me, it was Exhibit C in the indictment that would bury them forever. I placed the copy in a secure folder alongside the audio recordings and the financial audits. My arsenal was complete. With all the pieces in place, I focused my attention on the final stage, the annual shareholders meeting. It was their chosen battleground, the place where they intended to publicly humiliate and dethrone me. They had no idea that I had been preparing this battlefield for months. I contacted Eleanor Vance, the board's chairwoman. Under the guise of discussing my transition, I meekly agreed that perhaps it was time for me to step back, suggesting that Ethan present the company's quarterly performance review in my stead. He's worked so hard, Eleanor, I said, my voice thick with false sincerity. He deserves the spotlight, she agreed, her heart clearly breaking for the fragile heiress. I had just handed Ethan the rope, and I knew his ego would compel him to fashion his own noose. The day before the meeting, I made one final, crucial move. I sent a coded message to a trusted contact at the SEC's Enforcement Division and another to the District Attorney's office. The message was simple, containing only a time, a place, and a promise of irrefutable evidence of securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder involving a prominent New York family. I told them to be ready, to have their best people on standby. I wasn't just planning to expose Ethan and Chloe to a room full of shareholders. I was arranging for their arrests to be a public spectacle, a live-streamed media event that would obliterate their names and the Miller family's reputation for generations to come. That final night, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I sat in my father's office, looking out at the glittering expanse of Manhattan. The city was my kingdom, the one they had tried to steal from me through betrayal, conspiracy, and the threat of death. They saw me as a princess in an ivory tower, a delicate doll to be broken and discarded. They never realized that my father hadn't raised a princess. He had trained a queen. He had taught me that, in the world of power and money, mercy is a liability, and sentiment is a fatal weakness. Tomorrow, I would not be fighting for my company or my fortune. I would be claiming my throne, and the ashes of my enemies would serve as the foundation for my new reign. I thought back to that moment in the hallway, the click of the bedroom door sealing my old life away forever. The woman who had loved Ethan Miller, who had trusted Chloe Sterling, was truly gone. I felt no grief for her passing, only a cold, hard sense of purpose. She had been weak, and her weakness had almost gotten her killed. The woman who would walk onto that stage tomorrow was someone new, forged in the fires of betrayal, and tempered into something unbreakable. They had wanted me dead. By the time the sun set tomorrow, they would be the ones wishing for an end that would never come, trapped in a hell of their own making, while I rose from the wreckage, more powerful than they could ever have imagined. The show was about to begin. The grand ballroom at the plaza was a theater of my own design, and the players were perfectly positioned for the final act. Ethan stood at the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights, his face a mask of solemn concern. He was savoring his moment, the culmination of all his schemes. The shareholders watched him with a mixture of respect and pity for the man burdened with a broken wife. I saw Chloe in the front row, seated next to her parents, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. They were all there to witness my public execution, to see me stripped of my name and my sanity. They believed they were just minutes away from inheriting my kingdom. The live stream cameras from Bloomberg and CNBC were rolling, ready to broadcast my fall from grace to the entire financial world. Little did they know, they were about to broadcast a coronation instead. Just as Ethan prepared to launch into his prepared speech about my tragic decline, I made my move. I didn't storm the stage. I entered from a side door, walking with a calm, deliberate pace that commanded immediate attention. I wasn't leaning on anyone's arm. My posture was perfect, my gaze direct. A silent ripple went through the room as all eyes turned to me. I walked directly to the stage, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the polished wood, and stood beside him at the podium. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at him, my expression unreadable. His confidence faltered, a flicker of confusion, and then unease crossing his face. He saw, not the fragile victim he had created, but a woman he didn't recognize, a stranger who held the entire room in a silent, unbreakable grip. The power dynamic shifted in an instant, and he hadn't even realized the battle had begun. I gently moved his microphone aside and adjusted mine. "Good morning," I said, my voice crisp and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. My husband was about to discuss the leadership of this company, but before that, I'd like to present a brief update on its financial health. I nodded to Julian's operative in the tech booth. The massive screens behind me, meant to display quarterly earnings, flickered to life. They showed not charts and graphs, but a complex web of wire transfers, offshore account numbers, and contracts with shell corporations. Each one was meticulously traced, from Sterling Enterprises directly to accounts owned by Ethan Miller. I let the evidence hang in the air, a multi-million-dollar testament to his greed. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the audience. Ethan stared at the screen, his face turning the color of ash. His corporate life was over. Of course, I continued, my tone turning colder. Financial health is not the only concern. Questions have also been raised about my mental stability. The screens changed again. A high-resolution copy of Dr. Finch's forged psychiatric evaluation appeared, every lie and fabricated symptom on display. It was grainy, taken from a hidden camera in a restaurant. It showed Ethan and Chloe, who sliding a thick manila envelope. The audio was across the table, clear enough. To Doctor, just make it convincing, Ethan's voice said. Make sure the board has no choice. The shareholders gasped. This wasn't corporate malfeasance. This was a cruel, personal conspiracy. In the front row, Chloe's smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her social life was over. I let the video play out before delivering the final fatal blow. My voice dropped, becoming so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear. But the most significant threat to this company's stability, I said, pausing for effect, was a direct conspiracy against its majority shareholder. The screens went black, plunging the room into a tense twilight. Then, a single audio file appeared, its waveform pulsing like a heartbeat. I pressed play. Chloe's voice, shrill and venomous, filled every corner of the ballroom. If you had just made sure the brakes on her car were cut properly, we wouldn't be dealing with any of this. We'd have it all by now. A beat of horrifying silence. Then Ethan's hissed reply, "Shut your mouth, you idiot. Do you want someone to hear you?" The sound that followed was not a gasp, but a collective, horrified silence. Their entire lives were over. The silence that fell was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on the room. Ethan stood, paralyzed, a statue of a man whose soul had just been ripped from his body. His eyes were locked on mine, wide with a terror so profound it was almost pitiful. Chloe had crumpled in her seat, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with silent, convulsive sobs. Her parents, my doting in-laws, looked as if they had turned to stone, their faces pale and slack with the sudden, brutal understanding of their own ruin. Every camera in the room, once poised to capture my downfall, was now trained on them, broadcasting their utter destruction lived to millions. They were no longer powerful schemers or members of the elite. They were common criminals, exposed and humiliated on the world's biggest stage, trapped in the inescapable glare of their own monstrous deeds. As if summoned by the confession itself, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A team of NYPD detectives, led by a woman with cold, determined eyes, marched down the center aisle. The crowd parted for them like water. They didn't slow their pace until they reached the stage and in the front row. Ethan Miller, the lead detective, stated, her voice devoid of emotion, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and securities fraud." Another detective approached a whimpering Chloe. "Chloe Sterling, you are also under arrest." The sharp, metallic clicks of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room, each one a nail in their coffins. A chaotic explosion of flashbulbs followed, capturing their perp walk for eternity. They were dragged away, their faces forever seared into the public consciousness as monsters. I watched them go without a flicker of emotion. My heart was a calm, quiet place. The war was over. I turned back to the microphone, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board, the investors, and the press. They were looking at me with a new kind of respect, a fearful awe. The fragile heiress was gone forever. In her place stood a queen. As of this moment, I announced, my voice ringing with an authority they had never heard from me, I am assuming the role of CEO of Sterling Enterprises, effective immediately. The corruption has been purged. Now, our work begins. I didn't need to smile. I didn't need their applause. I had my company, my freedom, and my future. I had taken back everything, and in doing so, I had finally, truly, become myself. The weeks following the shareholders' meeting were a maelstrom, but I was the calm eye of my own hurricane. The story of the Sterling betrayal was a global sensation, a modern-day tragedy played out on every news channel and tabloid cover. But I did not allow them to frame me as a victim. I controlled the narrative with the same precision I'd used to destroy my enemies. Through a carefully selected PR firm, I authorized the release of specific pieces of evidence, the financial audits, the text messages, to respected journalists, ensuring the story was not one of a heartbroken wife, but of a brilliant strategist who had uncovered a massive corporate conspiracy. The world saw Ethan and Chloe not as adulterers, but as the monstrous criminals they were. My in-laws, the Millers, were caught in the inferno, their names becoming synonymous with parasitic greed, their social lives reduced to ashes overnight. My public image was forged anew in that fire, not as an heiress, but as an empress. The criminal trial was a mere formality, a public epilogue to a story whose ending I had already written. The evidence Julian had compiled was so airtight, so irrefutable, that the prosecution's case was less a battle and more a coronation of facts. I never had to take the stand. The audio recordings were my star witnesses, their own voices damning them more effectively than any testimony I could provide. I attended the sentencing, not for closure, but for confirmation. Seeing Ethan and Chloe in drab prison jumpsuits, their arrogance replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness, stirred nothing in me. There was no pity, no lingering anger, only the quiet satisfaction of a complex equation being solved. The judge handed down their sentences, decades for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy, and I felt only the cold, clean finality of a debt being paid in full. Justice, I learned, is not a passion. It is a meticulously balanced ledger. Prison was not enough. Their freedom was gone, but the stain of their existence on my fortune remained. My next move was to eradicate them financially, to ensure that even if they outlived their sentences, they would emerge into a world of absolute destitution. I unleashed a team of the most ruthless civil litigators in New York. We sued Ethan for every dollar he had embezzled, with interest and punitive damages that would follow him for the rest of his life. We sued Chloe for emotional distress, fraud, and a dozen other torts, systematically seizing every asset she had ever owned: the condo Ethan bought her, the jewelry, the art, all purchased with my family's money. It was a methodical process of erasure. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was reclaiming the years of my life they had consumed, converting my pain into their permanent, inescapable bankruptcy. My attention then turned to the silent accomplices, the Millers. While they had avoided criminal charges, their complicity would not go unpunished. Their punishment was not to be a swift execution, but a slow, agonizing social death. I moved with the silent efficiency of a predator. I acquired the small manufacturing firm M.R. Miller owned through a shell corporation and promptly liquidated it, forcing him into a humiliating early retirement. I made a series of strategic donations to the charities and country clubs they frequented, with the non-negotiable condition that the Miller family name be permanently struck from their membership rolls. They were blacklisted, ostracized, and cast out from the world they had so desperately clawed their way into. They were forced to sell their Greenwich home and retreat into the obscurity they deserved, left with nothing but their shame and the bitter knowledge that they had backed the losing side. Dr. Alistair Finch, the psychiatrist who had so eagerly tried to trade my sanity for a briefcase of cash, was a loose end I would not tolerate. For him, a special kind of vengeance was required, not just financial, but professional annihilation. I forwarded the unedited video of his bribery, along with a meticulously documented file of his unethical practices, to the American Medical Association and the state's licensing board. My legal team then established a pro bono fund to represent any of his former patients who wished to file malpractice suits. Within 6 months, he was a pariah. His license was revoked. His reputation was incinerated, and he was buried under an avalanche of litigation. He had tried to put me in a padded cell. I put him in a legal one, ensuring his name would serve as a permanent warning to any professional who thought their integrity was for sale. With the external threats neutralized, I began the internal cleansing of my kingdom. Taking the helm of Sterling Enterprises as CEO, I acted with a speed and decisiveness that left the board in a state of terrified awe. My first executive order was a purge. Every vice president Ethan had hired, every sycophant who had benefited from his reign, was summarily fired. Their access was cut, their offices were cleared, and they were escorted from the building by my security team before the ink on their severance checks was dry. In their place, I promoted those who had demonstrated unwavering loyalty and exceptional competence. Marcus Thorne, the auditor who had uncovered the financial rot, was named my new chief financial officer. The message to every employee was immediate and clear. The era of cronyism was over. Sterling Enterprises was now a meritocracy, and I was its unforgiving arbiter. The company I inherited was wounded, its reputation tarnished by the scandal. I saw it not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. The Wharton-trained mind that I had allowed to languish in the service of my husband's ego was now fully unleashed. In my first year, I executed a strategy so bold it stunned Wall Street. I divested from the stagnant real estate holdings my father had favored and poured that capital into aggressive acquisitions of disruptive tech startups and renewable energy firms. I restructured the entire corporate hierarchy, streamlining operations and fostering a culture of relentless innovation. The market responded. Sterling Enterprises' stock price didn't just recover, it tripled. I wasn't just maintaining my father's legacy, I was forging a new one, building an empire that was leaner, smarter, and more powerful than he could have ever imagined. My personal life underwent a similar, ruthless restructuring. I sold the Park Avenue penthouse without ever setting foot in it again. Its memories were irrelevant, but its psychic space was contaminated. I purchased a stark, minimalist triplex in a new, gleaming tower of glass, and still a fortress of solitude overlooking the city. It was a space designed not for comfort, but for command. My social calendar was similarly purged. The endless charity balls and society dinners were replaced with strategic meetings, dinners with central bank governors, private consultations with tech visionaries, and discreet negotiations with political power brokers. My relationships became alliances, my conversations became transactions. I had learned the hard way that sentiment is a liability that a queen cannot afford. I would never make that mistake again. The few who had proven their loyalty were rewarded beyond measure. Julian Vance and his security firm were awarded an exclusive, multi-million-dollar annual retainer to handle all of Sterling Enterprises' global security needs. He had been my sword and shield, and I made him a king in his own right. Eleanor Vance, the board member who had trusted me, became my closest confidant and the chairwoman of my advisory council. I learned that loyalty, true loyalty, is the rarest and most valuable commodity in the world. It is not something to be expected or demanded through affection, but a strategic asset to be cultivated, protected, and compensated with overwhelming force. My inner circle was small now, but it was forged from unbreakable steel, bound not by sentiment, but by mutual respect and shared interest. Years have passed. On occasion, a small news alert will cross my screen. Notice of a denied parole hearing for Ethan. A footnote about Chloe's transfer to a lower security facility. I read them with the same detached interest as I would a quarterly report on lumber futures. They evoke nothing in me. No anger, no triumph, no lingering pain. They are ghosts, specters, from a former life that no longer has any connection to my own. Their punishment is not the prison cell. It is their complete and utter irrelevance. They conspired to take my world, and in the end, they were not even significant enough to remain a footnote in it. Their greatest failure was not in underestimating my intelligence, but in failing to understand that once I was unleashed, their entire existence would be reduced to a rounding error in the story of my rise. From my office, 100 stories above the city, Manhattan spreads out before me like a conquered map. The glittering lights are not stars, but assets, opportunities, and threats, all of which I monitor and control. I do not smile. Happiness is a fragile, volatile emotion I no longer have any use for. What I possess is something far more profound and enduring: absolute authority. The naive girl who believed in love stories is dead and buried. The woman who stands in her place was forged in the crucible of betrayal, and she fears nothing and no one. They tried to murder a princess, and in doing so, they inadvertently cleared the path for the queen to take her throne. This city is my kingdom. This company is my empire. And my reign is just beginning. I am often asked if I ever think of them, if the memory of their betrayal still haunts me. The question misunderstands the nature of my transformation. To be haunted requires an attachment to the past, a lingering emotional connection. I have none. The events that led me here were not a tragedy. They were a necessary catalyst. They were the fire that burned away the weaker parts of me, leaving only a core of tempered steel. I do not look back on that fire with anger or regret. I look upon it with the dispassionate gratitude of a survivor. It was the price of my education. They taught me the most valuable lesson of all. In a world of predators, you must become an apex. And from the apex, the view is clear, the air is thin, and you are utterly, magnificently, and finally alone. It is a throne I have no intention of ever giving up.